premiere of Star Trek The Motion Picture back in 1979. Quick question, how many people here were alive in 1979?
Not me.
I was.
Okay, good. We have a number of special guests with us and at least one who's going to be joining us in a bit. Quick program note, your normal host, George Silsby, is going to be popping in to say hello at some point, but George was unfortunately diagnosed with pancreatic cancer this past week, and so he's been beginning his treatment for that, and so we wish him the best with that, and of course he'll be back for our regular shows once he gets past this first round of chemo. So I know you're out there, George. Keep it up, and we're pulling for you.
Yes, we are.
Yes, indeed.
We have spoken.
Okay, so quick, we've got our regular hosts. Sun Seal is with us. How are you, Sun? Of course, I went with the person who was muted first.
She was super ready.
Good hosting, Carlos.
Yeah.
You went through them faster that way.
That's right. Anyways, I said, Ross, how are you doing?
Okay, Ross, how are you doing?
Doing good today. The little
Excellent.
one's down for a nap, so I'm breathing easy for the moment.
Okay, good for you, Dad. And then joining us as special guests are a variety of tech celebrities, starting with author Dave Galanter, who is the writer of the forthcoming Star Trek Discovery book, Dead Endless, which is due out on December 17th, though it is available for pre-order on Amazon and other online bookstores, I assume. Dave?
Yes.
How are you doing?
And thank you very much. Good to be here.
We're happy you're here. Dayton Ward, I think, is supposed to be joining us, depending on whether or not the football game wins out over us. He's
on
the author of the Star Trek Discovery book, Drastic Measures, which came out last year. And then we're also honored to have with us, I guess the closest thing Star Trek has to an official chronicler, that's you, Larry, Nemecek from Portal 47 and Trekland. I don't know. I think who else would compete with you for that title?
Oh, I don't know, Mike, Doug. I mean, you have lots of good folk out there. But thank you.
No, I mean, but they're there are people who work beside you. You're like, your job is telling the story of Star Trek, which
okay,
is admirable. So
That's
I'll take the compliment, Larry.
Larry, that's a good distinction.
I am. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good distinction. You had to study more about it, and they were sort of living it. So
yeah, they were immersed in it.
Okay. Well, immersion was had a big club then. But yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I'll take it. Hey, thanks, Carlos. Thanks.
All right, and last but not least is YouTuber and incisive commentator Ketwolski. Welcome again. He's been with us before.
Oh, thank you for having me back on. I appreciate it.
And I'm glad we figured out that it's not 11:30 p.m., which would have kept you up really late. In which case, I'm really glad that you were willing to be up at 11:30 p.m.
I was ready to be here. You guys told me the Star Trek chronicler himself was going to be here, Harry Nemecek.
I wake up at 4:30 for work. I would not have been here.
All right.
Well, it's good to say hi, though, Kat.
Ketwolski, I'm glad to find. We finally have never had this chance, even though we were like in a huge 50-faced room or something at one point. But
yeah, for sure. We've been in like the nebulous of each other. We haven't actually had an opportunity to kind of connect directly, point to point. So yeah, it's good to finally actually be able to talk to you and see you.
Yes.
So, well, here you are in only a 7-person room, so
that's
go to
right.
town, you two.
The sanity bar is high with this one, Carlos. So
yes, oh yes, I believe me, I understand that. Finally, last program note: actor Chris Doohan, who plays the son of James Doohan, who played Scotty originally, and Chris played Scotty in Star Trek Continues. Unfortunately, his mom passed away. And yes, and on Star Trek Online, his mom passed away very recently, and so he is at her funeral this weekend. So unfortunately, he was not able to join us.
That's sad.
Yes. Oh, thank you for putting that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, putting up the picture there.
Okay, so let's launch in. I have a variety of questions. I'm not sure we'll get through all 15 of them in an hour, but we'll do our best. And we'll go kind of round robin. We'll start off first with, put that back up, Justin, because we're going to do our quick dedication to DC Fontana, Dorothy Fontana, who passed away this week. I know, Larry, you obviously met DC Dorothy more than once, right?
Right. Yeah. Especially the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah. I met her on Star Trek New Voyages when she wrote To Serve All My Days, and had dinner with her and David Gerald and a few other folks in LA around that time as well. So she was a wonderful woman. And for me, it was like a personally like transcendent moment to be sitting next to one of my favorite Star Trek writers. And it's something I never thought I'd experience in my life. So definitely mourning her passing. Anyone else want to say a few words about DC Fontana before we move on?
I had the same experience as Carlos. I ended up meeting her because of Star Trek New Voyages, and was able to chat with her a little bit. And of course, I've written 2 Spock books that were very Spock-centric, classic Trek books. And you can't help but thank her for all that she did to help build that character. Certainly Leonard Nimoy and Gene Kuhn and Gene Roddenberry had a lot to do with it, but I almost sensed that she had the most to do with it.
I
love Spock, so she is genuinely missed.
Well, between This Side of Paradise and Journey to Babel, just for starters, and then incrementally.
Yeah, Yesteryear, I think is
right,
still
and
one
then
of
Yesteryear, right? Yeah,
yeah, one of the best Spock stories, and it's in the animated series.
Yep.
Anyone else before we move ahead?
I don't have any personal experience with her, but probably one of the best tributes that I've seen since her passing. My Eyebrows' biggest fan, Triangulum Studios, he released a tribute video for her that I thought was especially touching. So I suggest looking that up. It's on YouTube.
Yep, I saw that video as well. I'll echo that statement. It was very well done, and I thought it was very touching. I don't have any personal stories about DC either, but it is interesting, I think, to, like you mentioned, how a lot of people attribute a lot of the stories to Gene Kuhn and Gene Roddenberry, and kind of the bigger names, where she was kind of more of like a behind the scenes type person, but her impact on the franchise was something that I think is still being felt even now. And it's kind of crazy that some people, not anything disrespectful to them or to her, but some people just don't even know really who she was or what her impact was. And I think with her passing, it kind of brought a little bit more of that into light in a good way, in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, she was a trailblazer as a woman writer in network television in the 1960s. Her accomplishments are pretty amazing. She started out as someone's secretary, studio executive secretary, and turned that into a regular writing gig. And
although she came to LA, I mean, she did the path that we all think about, except that she was a woman doing it, not a guy. And at a time when people didn't think about, I'm going to be a writer, so I'm going to be an assistant and get into. I mean, people didn't. Because there was a lot more free, like the writing staffs were a writer and then a sidebar and then freelancing. Like, you didn't have 47-member writing staff. So,
right.
So people were doing that, but she was a woman, but at the same time, it wasn't, oh, look at me, I'm a woman. She just did it and went with DC. And yeah, my Tuesday Live this week was about that. But it's like everyone's celebrating all their episodes, and they should. And it does strike me that people have to sit down and go, here's who she is. Because in the old days, when you had 79 shows to watch, when you saw DC Fontana's name come up, after the 3rd or 4th time, you went, wait, that Gene Kuhn name is a name, and that DC Fontana person is a name, and you kind of got it even before you had even books, much less the internet. And then I realized, looking back at making a Star Trek this week, that like aside from the cast headshots, and then there's a headshot of Gene. And then there's some behind the scenes pictures shooting, on location or something. The only other person whose headshot is in there is DC Fontana. And it's like stuck in an inset into a bigger picture. So it's like somebody went, we need to put, like Gene Kuhn's picture isn't in there because he had just left the show. So no one's going to,
Right.
But here's Dorothy's picture stuck in. It's almost like a little reminder of how prominent she was, even when you didn't think about it. But yeah, I think anybody's watched the reruns, the name will sink in. And so, but that's what it's up to us now to make sure that, because on all these meta levels, you talk about her shows, and that, of course, that's what it is. And the animated series, she basically show ran the animated series and did Yesteryear, and then was there at Roots Next Generation. But then you go, like Carlos, you said, you go meta, where now women and minorities are going, oh my God, look, she's a trailblazer at a time when you didn't get to, march and have hashtag campaigns. You just got out there and tried to get yourself in and do it. And then on top of that, she's such a sharer, and thank God she lived to be 80, and she was so welcoming, and any fan that got to see her at a convention, and she would gravitate to the smaller cons.
Yeah,
and then leave you with this, because it was Spock that she went to, and it wasn't a big thing. It's just, I think, where her interest lay. But if you think about this timeline, Dorothy Fontana develops Spock, makes him a breakout character even more than what genes laid into the DNA, right? Okay, so Spock is a breakout character, inspires all these mainly women to keep the story going when the show is canceled because of Spock and Vulcanness. You get zine culture, you get club culture, you get split off of mainstream, old school sci-fi lit cons to be Trek cons, and the media con is born, and bang, we have pop culture. Not to make a solid line, but you can trace pop culture, Comic-Con, mania culture today back to Trek and back to Spock and maybe even back to Dorothy.
The 8 degrees of Dorothy Fontana.
Yeah. Not to simplify things too much, but just put that, stick that in your quiver and shoot it.
All right. Well, thank you. And we'll certainly remember her and remind others about her impact on Star Trek, I hope, way into the future. Hopefully at least, another couple centuries. Okay, so let's start off with our 40th anniversary look back at Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It premiered on December 7th, 1979, 10 years after Star Trek was ignominiously, I can never say that word, ignominiously canceled from network television in 1969. It made a return, something that we had never seen before, a canceled TV show going to the movies. We've seen that since, but Star Trek was really, but Star Trek was really the first that did that I'm aware of, unless somebody else can jump in here with that. But so let's look back 40 years ago. For those of you who were alive, tell us geographically where on the globe you were when Star Trek: The Motion Picture premiered 40 years ago this week.
How many of us is that? Larry, is it just you and me and Carlos?
Is it just the three of us?
I was just wondering where this was going.
No, it's mostly just to put places on a map.
Right. Well, this is kind of funny because I've told this story before. I was in Norman. I was in Central Oklahoma, and I was in college. And are we allowed to say we're recording this on the 8th? Is that okay? Of course, we're past the 7th. Obviously, we're not out.
Yeah.
The 8th is actually my 40th anniversary, because at the time, everybody that I would have gone to see the movie with was in my college's speech and theater department, and we had a high school tournament that the department ran as a recruiting tool every year. And Friday night, the 7th, we all were stuck having to be judges and do rounds and stuff of high school kids. And we were all like, ah! It's kind of like the kids it's kind of like Justin Long and the kids at the end of Galaxy Quest, Mother, I don't think you understand the Now that I think about it, but that'd be anyway. So we all didn't get to see it until Saturday night, the 8th. So this is actually my personal 40th anniversary.
Oh, excellent.
As we sit here, if I have to, think of it that way, but yeah, Satellite Twin in Norman, where all the big movies came. So.
All right, Norman, Oklahoma. Dave Galanter, where in the world were you?
I was in Flint, Michigan. I lived in Flint Township, Michigan, just to differentiate. I had just turned 10 years old on December 1st, because I was born in December 1st of 69, and I begged my parents to take me to the premiere, which I guess, I'm not sure exactly why, but we had to go to Detroit for it. I guess it wasn't opening in Flint that particular weekend for some reason. So they drove me down to Detroit, and I saw the premiere. We waited in actually a fairly long line, because I guess it was the Detroit area and there were more people there excited to see it. My mother had gotten me into Star Trek, so she went with me, and my father did something else in the mall while
for 17 hours. Yeah,
yeah, it was a long movie,
and that's just Act 3
for me at age 10, but I still loved it.
Great.
That's where I was.
Well, for me, I was a senior in high school in Denver, Colorado. Although I did not see it in Denver, Colorado, I saw it in San Jose, California, because I was visiting my uncle for the holidays, and he's the one who he's my favorite uncle, and he may be my favorite uncle because he took me to see Star Trek the Motion Picture. I was thrilled. The whole idea that this thing that had been dead was rising, from the ashes like a phoenix was an amazing experience for me. I was super happy about it. And read everything I could about it. We'll talk a little bit more about how we remember that in a little bit. So it sounds like we were California, Michigan, and Oklahoma. So for those of you Baby Yodas on the panel.
We have one extra location. George is in the chat for the stream, and he says he saw it in theaters in Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Oh, okay. So we've got coasts covered and the interior as well. So thank you, America. All right. So for you Baby Yodas on the panel, where were you when you first, it's a two-part question. Mm-hmm. Where were you when you first saw Star Trek Motion Picture? And two, have you ever seen it on a big screen? Ketwolski, let's start with you.
So to answer the first part, I'll answer the second part, which is easier, which is no, I haven't seen it on a big screen personally, not yet. I will eventually, because I know they keep bringing it back every so often through the Fathom events and stuff. But where I saw it the first time was just at my house. I actually kind of remember a little bit of it on like television, seeing it there. And then my dad had it on VHS, which, I think even a younger crowd may not know what that is, but had it on VHS and he put it on. And I just distinctly remember it feeling like it was 4 different movies because it was so long to get through. Really long. And I was a young kid, and we watched all the other ones, and I kind of gravitated towards the whales one because I was a kid. But yeah, I remember watching it and thinking, this is the most boring thing I've ever watched, and I hated it. So my opinion has changed. I guess we'll get to that later.
We'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah,
yes.
But yeah, as a kid, that was a young kid, pre-teen, probably closer to 10, if not younger, when I first watched it at the house. So.
Awesome. Son, how about you?
So my story is completely different. I actually saw the motion picture in my mid to later teens, I want to say. But that's because I actually grew up watching The Next Generation. Didn't know what was going on, and then, come to find out there's this whole backstory to The Next Generation, and then catching up. And no, I haven't seen it on a big screen. It's all been small screen, television, VHS kind of stuff.
All right. And Ross, you're our last Baby Yoda.
It's only 5 years. Come on. Well, I was probably around 10, 11 years old. Generations was in the second run theater at that point, for the other Baby Yodas who don't know what that is. And I had gotten an interest in seeing the rest of them. I'd been watching Next Generation for a long time, and my Uncle Bob, who passed away around 10 years ago, copied all of his collection onto 2 long play VHSs, and I'd spend a Saturday and watch all 6 movies all the way through. Sometimes I'd rewind through the first one because it was the least interesting to me. I never thought it was bad or excessively boring. Who doesn't love what was it, 5 minutes long shot of the Enterprise?
I think it was 10. It was a long shot.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, 10 minutes.
Well, actually,
I'd watch that and then fast
hate
forward to Wrath of Khan.
Did your uncle cut off the FBI warning against doing what he was doing?
in each one, yeah.
For the young people out there, they used to have that in the front of a VHS.
There's an honor system.
Copy. The FBI was going to come get you.
That's right. It was an honor system.
Don't make this
You
copy.
better not. I'm not messing around. I'll come.
You wouldn't download a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember one of the things about that, especially that scene that you're talking about, the very long beauty shots of the Enterprise in dry dock. which, for me, it was like I wanted to examine every single inch of that ship. So I didn't mind how long that took, personally. My issue was later on with how many different ways can you show a cloud, but we'll talk about that later too. But that's a transition to my next question, which is, I'm curious from some of you, your opinion about whether the motion picture was sort of a successful transition for Star Trek from kind of what we now look back as a kind of cheap looking, back then of course it was expensive, but cheap looking 60s sci-fi show, to what became a major motion picture franchise that just won't die, thank God. And many more series following it. What role do you think this movie played in that transition, and how effectively did it do so? Larry, let's start with you.
Oh, well, it's funny because just laughing about the FBI warning. It's like having to remember, and I try to do this, but then you can't help but be blindsided. Try to remember the things that everybody doesn't just know, which of course is becoming a longer and longer list as the years go by. But I keep saying that for all the the cinematic and critical faults of the motion picture, it's the only Star Trek movie that you really have to stop. And I'm not saying excuse all its faults as a feature, as a film, but you have to put it in the bottle of what it was, because we mentioned already, it's the first time a dead TV show, anybody thought, well, there's commercial value, much less, any other value in why bring this back? And yeah, the Batman TV movie and the Munsters Go Home and all those, but they were like PR promo things to milk a little more money out of a series that was on TV at the time. And this is the first time that I think we're all kind of scrambling trying to remember this, but I think it's the first time a dead, especially a failed TV show, 3 years, a dead show was brought back for big screen. Like, why would we do that? And, and the wall is so broken down now with cinematic TV and streaming and all that. But we're talking the heart of are you a TV actor or are you a film actor? And my career is descending, so now I can do a sitcom where I used to be a leading man, kind of a thing, thinking. Mm-hmm. And crews, same thing with writing and, and behind the scene camera and all that. And for that to have happened just in the industry was kind of amazing. And then now, and like I was kind of saying with Dorothy and Vulcans and the whole thing there with fandom, and what this led to that way, as far as showing what can happen and showing, Star Trek fans act like they own the thing. Well, they do, and they did, because nothing like that had ever happened. This wasn't Rudolph Valentino or the Beatles or Elvis. This was an entity, a show that was bigger than any one person. And it's the first time that...
Not if you ask William Shatner.
Ready for that. Right. Or the ghost of Gene Roddenberry. But
you can't discount that Star Wars doing the business it did was the reason that Paramount said, we got to have our own.
Right. But synergistically, how did Star Wars get made? Because of this explosive... Because by then, the Star Trek thing had been 2, 3, 4 years in the making.
That's true.
And George Lucas got his financing and encouragement from Gene. So...
Yep.
I mean, that's what the whole Star Wars, Star Trek thing has always been amazing to me. It's like they needed each other in the moment, so.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, but my point here is that I always want to look at, on about 5 or 6 levels, the motion picture beyond just, let's critique it as a movie. And yes, I did also fall asleep in Act 3. But what's amazing about Star Trek is you can never not know. I mean, there are things coming out about Trek all the time, and something that I didn't realize until or I forget who I heard it from, somewhere directly 3 or 4 months ago, about the last effects. The reason that, you were saying we all loved, or a lot of us loved, the close exam, the fly around of the ship. That was for the people that watch the movie now and go, oh my God, how much longer is this going to go on? That was not just a love letter to all the ship nerds. That was a love letter to fandom who had been around 10 years, because this was, if nothing else, the whole reason fandom existed in the beginning was, to celebrate the show because you loved it, but it was it was activism. It was like, bring it back, bring it back. It was a hashtag without a hashtag at the time.
Yeah.
And the first movie was like, we did it, we won. There was this whole vindication level to, ha ha ha, take that. Paramount and NBC and Man, look what we did. And even though, and there was a little bit of, I mean, it was just in the DNA. It wasn't so much, now guys, we all have to go see it on opening weekend so it could be #1 and break some, I mean, there wasn't that, people weren't media savvy like that. We just did it because in your gut, you kind of knew that if you wanted another movie, you ought to go see it. But people, and there was a little bit of Star Wars competition, like the new kid on the block. Okay, but now we finally got ours. And, you know, and I only saw it 5 or 6 times. I didn't, you know, see it 47 times or something, but there was a little bit of that at play too. And then only as the years, and a lot of people were kind of disappointed, but it's almost kind of like it's in the family. So we're not going to criticize in, you know, outside, we'll just keep it inside. But for, you know, all of that is going on at the same time. And yeah, of course, then Wrath of Khan comes out, they demote Gene, and there was this whole, now that's more like it kind of feeling with the Wrath of Khan. And wow, they just junked all the costumes and they just junked all the this, that, and the other, you know, to the risk communicators, that's gone. Okay. No Dick Tracy. Okay, fine. But at the moment, people were just so relieved. People were like blindsided to a lot of the flaws. They just say, you know, poke me when they get down to going into V'ger and I'll wake up again. But the amazing, well, I'll save this story for later because I don't want to blab on and on. But there's this whole other lens that, and I say all that, not to say, let's not critique it as a film. And to everybody who didn't like live through that or realize that part of it, it's a vindication, it's a victory. But it is the reason why that's the DNA of, you know, the whole the mail-in campaign in the 60s, the other arc of that, the end point of that line right there is the debut of the motion picture, even with all its flaws. So, and then we're off to the races.
Off to the races, and have been for 40 years.
Yep.
Ketwolski, what do you think? How well did it transition Star Trek from the 60s to modern day?
I would say that obviously I can't speak to what it was at the time because obviously I wasn't there. But I would say that it reignited a legacy that has continued on, as we just said, you know, for the next 40 years plus, that had it not existed, obviously Star Trek probably would not have continued, which would have been a detriment to everybody, including myself and everyone who obviously needs Star Trek and loves Star Trek so much. I would say that it did the job it needed to do, which is to put Star Trek back on the map and say, this is a franchise that can be taken seriously, even though I think there was some disappointment with it, just based off of, you know, feedback I hear from a lot of people who were there at the time and from people now. Like, I think there was a bit of disappointment with what people may have been expecting to see from the motion picture. But I now personally, like, as I've grown up, you know, and become an adult, I like it and I appreciate it for the fact that it wasn't just trying to repeat the success of like Star Wars, because obviously that was the new hotness on the block. So when everyone was like, oh, they're coming out with Star Trek, this is going to be the competition. But it really shifted back to a more traditional science fiction film, which is why it felt like it took, you know, 45 days to get through. And I appreciated it for that fact, because it took itself a bit more seriously, as opposed to Star Wars, where it was just a fun action adventure, whereas Star Trek was a little bit more of a thought-provoking kind of slow burn science fiction film. And I think that it successfully translated the stories and the style and the spirit, I guess you could say, of the original series onto the screen. And then I feel like over time, people have refocused and rehoned that and done different things with it. But in terms of the motion picture capturing the spirit of what the original series was, which is like thought-provoking discussions, you know, the teams working together, having to deal with the unknown, like I feel like it captured that pretty well and took the, you know, traditional science fiction film formula and plugged it right into there. So I think it worked. I definitely don't know. I don't know how I would feel if I was in that situation back then, you know, going to see it in theaters. I don't know how I would feel, but now as an adult watching the motion picture, it's one of my favorite Star Trek films because I appreciated it for not trying to be other things. It just knew what it wanted to be. And I think it did it successfully, in my opinion.
Great. Dave, anything you want to add?
Well, I will say that I think it certainly leaned more toward 2001 than it did Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
I think Paramount probably wanted it to lean more toward Star Wars than
Yeah.
2001.
Yeah.
And I think
Especially the
audiences
money.
probably would have been they were receptive, but I think even more receptive because, at the time, if you were in fandom, it was called Star Trek: The Motionless Picture, Star Trek: Spocalypse Now, and things like that.
Star Trek: The Motion Sickness.
Yes, had it gone a little bit more toward some more action. But it was definitely a very esoteric story, which is, I think, the kind that sometimes Roddenberry very much likes to tell. And I don't mind that. I wrote a book that's coming out on the 17th that's a very sort of esoteric. There's not a lot of pew-pew in my book either, meaning pew, 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 not people, making little pellets or something. As far as the aesthetic is concerned, from a TV show to a movie, I think they did exceptionally well. They clearly spent a lot of money.
Yep.
It definitely has a 1970s aesthetic to it in the clothes. And by the way, one of the reasons that they changed the clothes probably just 3 years later, other than people getting chunky, is the 80s had a different aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
They had more of the shoulder pad sort of stuff, and it was the Reagan era, and things were a little bit different.
Yep.
And I was okay with all of that. They couldn't obviously change the ship too much because that's expensive in itself. But every era of science fiction has its vision of what the future looks like. In the 1960s, it was, with Star Trek, it was that mid-century modern, Danish modern sort of look to it. And one of the things I've tried to explain to people as to why the 2009 Star Trek movies and Star Trek Discovery look different is because our understanding of what looks futuristic has to move with the times, because quite frankly, what we see now in modern science fiction movies in 30 or 40 years is going to look ridiculous. As we can see, because we have wrist communicators. and so all of that will look very old, and what we're doing now will look very dated, and you have to update it. So I think they did a great job in transitioning it as far as the look was concerned. The feel was definitely, like I say, there's room for a 2001 type Star Trek movie. I am glad that they gave it another shot and that we could get something a little more toward some action, but still have a good story. Star Trek's 2, 3, and 4 definitely had characterization and story and were very good in those lines. And so, but I think this was all sort of characterization and a little bit confusing sometimes as well. I still don't know why Spock was able to hear the V'ger probe call to him. It was never explained, and I'm not sure.
It wasn't even in the novelization.
Was it not?
It was just this, like, somehow V'ger knew that Spock was an entity that would understand it or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I never figured that one out either. It was kind of a weird plot point, I think. But well, that's Star Trek for you.
It was
because
in the
it's
script.
Spock.
Right.
Because Spock.
I mean, in the novelization, as I recall, Gene Roddenberry spent a lot of time talking about sort of the telepathic nature of Spock more than we had ever seen in the series, and just sort of the raw intelligence of the V'ger probe. Apparently, just kind of
checking the books.
It had probably collected somehow TV broadcasts from the 60s, and it just knew Spock that way.
Yeah,
that's probably true.
Of course.
Yeah. I do want to say,
poor people.
Didn't he? Hi guys, by the way.
Hi,
sorry
Sean.
For a late arrival. Been sick and stuff, and technical difficulties. You can see I'm doing this from my phone in my car. So glad to be here, and I apologize again. But I wanted to say this. But I mean, we did establish in the original series that Spock can feel the death of an entire starship full of Vulcans. Did we not?
Yes, it wasn't about his telepathic abilities. It was about how is V'ger reaching out specifically to him. He said it called to him.
Well, here's how I would retcon it. I would retcon it as, V'ger was looking for, was reporting back as according to its original mission, and was reaching out.
See,
I'm back.
I I always looked at when he said that he calls to me. It calls to me. It was kind of like a rhetorical. Like when I say, for example, that wearing no pants calls to me, that type of thing.
It's a metaphorical
It's
call.
completely exactly. It's a metaphor, right?
I think it's illegal to not wear pants in your car.
Oh yeah, but in your own driveway, you can do what you want.
That's true.
He's unfortunately correct about that. Okay, Ross or Son, do you want to chime in at all on this, or
Son, you go ahead.
It definitely did make a good transition from the original series, which I watched after watching the motion picture for the first time. So, yeah, it's weird to go down sort of in quality, going backwards in time. But yeah, it definitely stands out as making the transition from storytelling into a film. But yeah, no, it definitely has that 2001 aesthetic of really long, slow shots that just kind of, you know, a lot of people go, these are so boring, and you know, you were Carlos, you were talking about how this is every fan's dreams to be able to pick over the Enterprise in detail, and when I was watching it, it felt more like a, hey, guess what? This is your chance to stop and smell the roses about this being a sci-fi show. That's just me.
Yeah, that's there's a lot to be said about that. I've always said this about the motion pictures, that as far as Star Trek films, I think it is people think I'm crazy when I say this, but I have to quantify it or qualify here, because I think it is the best quote unquote Star Trek film, in terms of it is literally a big screen adaptation of a television series. That you find this feature you find in no other Star Trek films. Every other Star Trek film that followed it was an action film, and of course with The Voyage Home, it's a comedy film. But they're all big action films made for the cinema. This is literally like taking a TV show and just putting it on the big screen. So that's where I think the film succeeds the most, and I can understand why movie audiences at the time were I wouldn't say it didn't work for them as well, because they were expecting a big loud movie is what they were expecting, something with the pacing of a movie, and it really doesn't have that.
Well, here's where I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, because Star Trek, the TV series, was an action series. I mean,
but we talk a lot of action series.
Yes, I mean, but it was still an action series. I
would say Insurrection was probably.
I was going to mention that too.
Yeah, I think
that's a 2-hour episode of Next Gen. I agree, but it certainly has more of the actual blockbuster film type elements than you would see. And this is what I'm more talking about. Not so much action, so much as the type of action element you would expect from a motion picture itself. And that's where I think, in my opinion, I think it really works the most for a Star Trek film. I agree with Son that I love to this day, not just because I build models, I still love the 7-hour and 24-minute pass by of the Enterprise in the beginning. Yeah,
it keeps getting longer every time we describe it.
Exactly, absolutely. So I love that to this day. I still think it's great. It's a gorgeous model, and the effects on the detail are just are just absolutely amazing. So
okay, I'm going to interrupt you because we've got a lot of other questions and not a lot of time left. So we're going to move to our next one, and this is
I thought it did an okay job.
Okay.
Since we're crunched on time, I'll leave.
Yeah, sorry. We've got a lot to cover. And okay, so let's talk a little bit about what today people refer to as Gene's vision, Gene Roddenberry's vision. It does pick up a thread from what you're talking about, Sean, in terms of that transition from his point of view from television to motion pictures. And for him, it was I always felt like it was like a big homecoming for him, because it redeemed him in a lot of ways. The success of the TV series and syndication, the huge financial success, of it, which was, one of the things that impelled it moving into production as a movie. But I look back at this movie, and it was everything Gene Roddenberry wanted it to be, which ended up being kind of assailed critically. Critics did not like it. It did very well financially, not as well as it could have or should have, maybe, but it's still, I think, adjusted for inflation, it's still the highest grossing Star Trek movie.
It is. Until the JJ movies, it was
Right.
was, people forget that. It was like they think of 4 and 6 being, in First Contact, but the motion picture, and I think it's because it's like, it's the 10-year wall of emotion. The dam broke almost, and it all, which is amazing to think of. Even without inflation, I think it made more, piled up more. Of course, it had a longer. There were, back in those days, they would have, like 6 months later, it would make another theatrical tour.
Yeah.
I think it went through theaters again after that. But
and the fans, this is a big part of this. The fans that waited so long for this film to come out, for Star Trek to be reborn, as it were, they went back 2, 3, 4 times to see it, even though it wasn't even that big of a, some of them didn't even like the movie that much.
It's all they had.
It's all they had. All we had.
Yep.
And you had, another 7 minutes to take a look at every inch of the Enterprise. So
that's it. Exactly.
But let's get back to this question of Gene's vision, because it's something we hear a lot today, with a lot of both the critical acclaim and critiques of Star Trek Discovery, and of the JJ movies even, that in some ways they supposedly betray Gene's vision. So I'm going to put out there, and I don't mean to impugn the man, because I think he was a legend, but at the same time, it seems to me that whenever Gene Roddenberry was in charge, like completely in charge, Star Trek kind of faltered. It was other people around him and other circumstances that really sort of picked up his vision, but turned it into an actual TV series or an actual film that kept going.
That's kind of the thing with DC Fontana in the first place. And that was kind of her whole role too, was picking up Gene's slack in some instances.
Well, and Gene Kuhn, of course.
And Gene Kuhn, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Larry, what do you think historically?
That's true, and that whole guruification that Gene started off. I got to pay my mortgage in the 70s. While nothing I make picks up. Kind of got there. At the same time, a lot of the woes the motion picture, like, it lost so much money and we spent so much money. You got to remember that every development cost of the 70s, the 2 movie projects that didn't happen, in phase 2, the TV show, and all that cost got dumped onto the motion picture to pay for. And it actually did. I mean, when they quote those box office numbers, all the bad debt of the 70s, it carried it on those shoulders.
Right.
So that did happen. So that's part of the negativity around the motion picture, was the vibe out of the studio of, look how much money we spent on it, and it didn't, out Star Wars. But at the same, at the time we all fell asleep in Act 3, in which, here's a real quick thing. Amazingly, I didn't know this until 2 or 3 months ago, but I knew that all the film, the whole thing about the December had to do it date, which is part of why it was bloated, was because they did these effects and they couldn't finish them. And part of the appeal of the director's edition was they finally got to finish, David Fine and Darren and Mike Matessino. They got to make Robert Wise's vision finally. They just didn't do it in HD. But even though we felt that a little bit, the hugest thing was those reaction shots, the endless thing through the cloud. Part of that was, even though the film prints had been shipped wet, when Robert Wise went to the DC premiere, he was they got the last effect shot, not the whole movie. Well, he had the whole movie, but he was also carrying the last reel of effects from the cloud penetration that had never been spliced in. They literally left chunks of black for live action reaction and chunked it in. They slipped the reel in as they played it live at the Smithsonian, or at the DC premiere. Mm-hmm. So part of the reason why there's those and now Sulu reacts, now Ilea reacts, now Chekhov, all of that stuff that put us to sleep was because they hadn't had a chance to edit the reel down. I was just, he was flying with, the films shipped wet to the theaters for the next day, but he was carrying the one copy while it was being copied at the lab, the one copy of that sequence, and they didn't have time to edit it down. that kind of, that's
crazy.
some of that was some of
Yeah,
the
it's
crazy,
mind-boggling.
some of the bloatedness of the movie that we all go, ugh, critically. Because the first thing out of the gate, the Klingon attack and reuniting the gang. And I mean, you get through all of that and it's subdued and it's 70s Logan Run costumes in 2001 with a lot of Space 1999 thrown in, 70s pantsuits, but it's not so bad. It's only till it gets the slowdown bit and some of the compromises they had to make, and the memory wall, and it just had a really trouble thing, and so many thumbs were in the pie to make it because the bar was so high, because they had to counter Star Wars and they had to counter Close Encounters, and and part of the reason they threw money at it wasn't just that we got to throw money at it because we don't know what else to do, was because they had to make that December 7th date, or they were going to lose like in $79 they were going to lose like $30 million or something in guarantees that they'd have to pay back the theater.
Right.
But all of that led to it being bloated and not the best thing out of the gate. But as far as the core vision, you look back and I think it was a point of pride that the only weapon fired in the whole movie, talking about the gene vision, was when they shoot the photon at the asteroid. They tried to blow out of the wormhole and avoid the collision with the asteroid. So, but if you're falling asleep in Act 3, that all is past you. You're not.
Is there even I was thinking about this, Larry. Refresh my memory here, even though I've seen it a million times. I don't recall a phaser being displayed once in the whole film.
No, it's
no. They come in,
Yeah.
Or
when the
like
security guy, when the riot police security guys show
with
up.
Aaliyah, or Ilea when she shows up as the probe. Is that when they have their phasers?
Right. Well,
drawn?
the probe, the live effect around the bridge. Absolutely, I will not interfere. That thing. The guards are like, they've got their phasers up.
Oh, it's a good accent.
That's pretty good.
Wow, that was really great.
That's a pretty good checkout right there.
Better Walter than no.
Oh,
Ketwolski, you cover a lot of sort of modern day fan reactions and how so many of them harken back to the Gene's vision thing, and you see that play out in the way that new Star Trek is being received. What do you, is it fair to talk about this being Gene's real vision, or what role does it really play today?
I think it's fair to say that the motion picture is the core essence and the spirit, like I talked about earlier, of Gene's vision for Star Trek. And I think it's okay to say that that's what he envisioned it as. And I also think that a lot of people have blinders on in some regards to more modern Trek, including the JJ films and now the Secret Hideout Kurtzman era stuff. I think people have some blinders on that everything like 2009 on has betrayed the vision, and everything before that was all well and good and totally within the vision of Gene Roddenberry, which is not true. Like, I wasn't even around when these shows were premiering. I mean, I was like a little kid, but a lot of these shows were premiering in the 80s and early 90s and stuff like that. I wasn't even really cognizant of all those things, but even I can sit there and recognize like there's a clear difference between what's happening in Deep Space Nine, the ends of TNG and Voyager, than what was originally happening when Gene was super involved there. And I don't think it's a betrayal of the vision. I think it's an evolution of the vision. Like, you have to continue to update the story and how the stories are being told for the audience at the time. And honestly, I'm not trying to, crap on Gene in any way, shape, or form. I think it got lucky because the motion picture premiered and is in its essence a traditional science fiction film. But if they tried to release that now, more in line with what his traditional vision is, it would be a total dud. Like, nobody really would go and see that production because it's not necessarily what would resonate with a modern audience. And it doesn't necessarily you have to have constant explosions and shooting guns and half-naked women running around or whatever it is like that. You don't need that, but
It
to
does
have
help.
just that. It does help. It does help. Sell tickets.
Well,
yeah, it does.
It doesn't hurt. Let's put
It doesn't
that
hurt.
way.
Right. It doesn't hurt. But I don't like the term like betrayal of the vision. This is a franchise that has a whole lot of different visions and artistic interpretations attached to it, both alpha canon and beta canon. We're talking to, we got, Dave here, and Larry, you guys are a lot involved with some of that beta canon, soft canon stuff, and, the tertiary like books and comics and video games and all stuff like that. Like, there's so many different artistic interpretations of Star Trek that I don't think betrays the vision. It's just they're interpreting it in their own way and kind of presenting their story in that universe. And, you know, we as fans can either say, yeah, that was good, or yeah, it was not good, but to just flatly deny it because it's like, this isn't exactly what Gene would have wanted back in the 60s or the 70s, I think is you're selling yourself short at that point.
Yeah,
Well, if I may for a second, I can't know what Gene would have wanted. I never met Gene. I think when he passed away, I was like probably 18 or 19, something like that. But what he created and how it spoke to me is then the interpretation that I give back to it.
Right.
And so, and I think just from, you know, seeing some of the things he's written, that's what he wanted. He wanted people to listen to his vision and then come up with their own ideas, their own interpretation, or just what they liked about that vision. And so that's what I feel a lot of us are doing. And certainly storytelling changes in every era. The wonder of the original series, to me, looking back at it, watching it with my 8-year-old niece sometimes, is that the pacing holds up very, very well for a TV show that was 50 years ago. You can't say that of a lot of TV shows from 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And the pacing of the motion picture was not quite as good. However, in line with a lot of pacing from 1970s movies, because some of that was written to that era.
Right.
And I think Star Trek, when it's willing to change based on the era that it's in, is very, very successful. Look, TNG started out a little bit slow, and then as it went, it got better. It started changing with the times, and that's one of the reasons we have Deep Space Nine, which was a completely different kind of Star Trek show, but still spoke to the vision because it still had interpretations of what it felt was good Star Trek, and it still tried to tell stories and did tell good stories against that in that medium.
Can I inject something real quick? Anytime Star Trek has come back, I mean, it's kind of an interesting anomaly that the whole meme about no Star Trek gets good until its third season. You know, except the original, because the original is what had to be good coming out of the gate, or it would have been, you know, canceled, or it would have got no attention, right?
Right.
Which means that everything after the original series was somebody trying to recapture.
Yes.
Whether they were totally uphill, or they had all the money and the, you know, goodwill in the world, whatever it was. Star Trek is a complicated thing, and the well-oiled machine and all that, and trying to get that reestablished, either you're trying to figure out what it is, or you think you've got a model and you're going to recreate it from 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. So every time there's been like a restart. Now the animated series I don't count because it's animation and had low expectations, and it was just a kiddie show on Saturday morning. I'm speaking for the facetious mainstream. Okay, I'm doing the throwaway. Fight. No.
You just gave Sean the vapors.
Yeah. You didn't see my emoji. Larry? Is that something? You didn't see my emoji. No, guys. No, we wrote for years saying the Kazine were the first aliens that humans contacted, because that was what known. Anyway, that was the problematic thing in the animated. But anyway, my point is that restarting Star Trek, whether it's the motion picture, whether it's Next Generation, whether it's the JJ movies, and especially Discovery, there's some amount of chaos going on. And part of what we factor into when we talk about the motion picture, or the first couple of years of Next Gen, or the first season of Discovery, there's a crazy chaos getting it all right, getting all the wheels spinning on the rods at the same, all the plates spinning at the same time, right? Getting all the balls in the air at the same time. And that's not a mean trick. And if Star Trek has to be allowed to curate a little bit until that all gets calmed down, because it is such a complex machine. And I think the motion picture and early Next Gen and what's that show? Discovery are the same, are all the same way in different doses. And like Next Gen was allowed to exist, to stew in its own soup for a couple of years, because they won that 7-year. The whole thing was financed and budgeted on a 7-year amortized schedule. You know, Discovery was like birthed in the light of day with 15 doctors and 3 moms and 2 dads, and it was the worst, you know, childbirth ever. And the motion picture was this huge political soup that was like a 5-year birth through, you know. So that's a factor but that's just, it's like Star Trek is deemed to be worth getting to that point. So people put up with that, but to go back and look in hindsight at all this, and then how it affects the core, the core concept. But yeah, Gene's core is coming. Anyway.
I'd like to add to that. I was thinking about this the other night. I was watching a few episodes of TOS. I was watching Assignment Earth, and I was watching Bread and Circuses, and a couple more that are socially relevant for the time they were in particular. And it occurred to me that Star Trek, when you think about how it's forgotten, I think, by my generation, especially because I didn't live through it. I was born in '75, but especially later generations have found that how turbulent and chaotic the 1960s were, and how unique it was in a period of time when people really worried about, the global destruction. It was a legit concern between the Cold War, between Vietnam, and the crisis in this country in particular. And Star Trek reflected that very much so. And so for it to come out into, when it came back to us in the late 70s, pushing into the early 80s here, for it to come back to it, it had to, like you said, it had to kind of find its way. It really did had to find its way, coming from its very 1960s era style and reflection upon culture and society to what it was for the late 1970s. It's I can imagine that as far as Gene's vision is concerned, yes, this is Gene's vision, but Gene's vision, it had to evolve itself for its audience it was trying to reach, especially in the theatrical release in the late 70s. So it really is astounding how after 50 plus years that the franchise has been able to adapt with, obviously some fits and starts, but still is able to find enough appeal to keep it going all this time. So, and that's as true for the motion picture as it is for Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Discovery, and all of it. So,
look, it's the end credits of Star Trek: The Original Series.
Oh my!
Hey, Dayton Ward, author Dayton Ward, has joined us, and actually the perfect time, because this next question was one aimed at you and Dave, and that is about how the motion picture. Did any part of it inspire you as a writer? Is there something you saw in the film that said this part is Star Trek and should be reflected in whatever stories I tell about it in the future?
I think in a general sense, yeah. I mean, in terms of the themes it tried to explore and the fact that it tried to be something more than a episode of the television series, which I honestly don't think you can say about any of the other Star Trek movies. They're all just sort of bloated TV episodes to one degree or another. But the first one was the one that tried to be something. So it's inspiring on that level. Yeah.
Dave, what about you?
Well, this is a softball pitched at me because the two standalone classic Trek novels I wrote are really both about sort of Spock and what might have eventually moved him in pieces and parts to move toward Kolinar, and Spock being a damaged individual. And I think in that movie, he is a damaged individual until he feels what V'ger feels. And then he realizes, well, haven't I gotten this kind of wrong? I've had the ability to do what V'ger hasn't all along, and I've been trying to push it away. So I love it for that. It's actually one of the things I love about almost every Star Trek, well, any Star Trek series I've watched. There's always something character-wise to latch onto and say, this is interesting and I want to explore it. I don't care what series it is, from Voyager and Enterprise, and all of them have had that in their DNA. And this movie did too, in spades, which is why I've tried to twice sort of explain, hey, what are the things that might have pushed Spock in that direction? So
Excellent.
big inspiration.
It's interesting that the whole notion of a broken Spock was something we saw revisited again in Star Trek Discovery's second season. And of course, when we see Spock going through the Kolinar at the beginning of the motion picture, it was a very different Spock than what we saw at the end of the third season. And again, Dave, you did explore that in your novels, but for those who haven't read it, I'd be interested in hearing what you and the rest of you also think about that revamp of Spock's character between the original series and the beginning of the motion picture, what we see during the motion picture and through the end of the motion picture, and then was that sort of promise carried through the rest of the franchise where we saw Spock?
It was, and I'll tell you exactly where. In Star Trek II, and who knows, maybe this was Nimoy saying he knows his character well, and he sort of informed them of where to go. He says things like, "Were I to invoke logic, not this is the logical decision, I'm making it," but he's got that sort of mindset about him. He is far more comfortable in his skin.
Self-aware.
In the other movies. Yeah, self-aware.
His last line in Undiscovered Country: "If I were human, my response would be go to hell."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's
exactly.
okay with himself. And quite frankly, Spock has been messed up forever. That's why they showed it in Discovery. It's the second episode that he's crying, doing math and crying because he couldn't tell his mother that he loved her.
Right.
I mean, Spock's a messed up guy.
And I hadn't really thought about this until you just brought it up, but the motion picture from a character standpoint for Spock is the turning point for his entire character for the next 40 years, period. I mean, it sets the standard for the Spock we know in every iteration, whether it be from the films, whether it be from Next Generation, whether it be from Discovery, whether it be from the new Abrams films. It sets the standard for the character, and it's a great arc. It's an emotional human arc. It's wonderful.
When they pick a plot to bring Leonard Nimoy to Next Generation, what do? They have Spock go rogue.
Yep, exactly.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Which
He does the most human
cowboy
thing you could
diplomacy.
possibly, right? Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
That's a good point.
And here's the thing about that at the end of Unification 2. That it's at the very end. Everyone has seen this. The moment that he mind melds with Picard, and the look on his face, the pure emotion that he's overwhelmed with, is just absolutely stunning. Again, it all goes back to the motion picture and what we established there.
And again, just on a really meta level, had the motion picture not had to be birthed in such an insane time. I mean, a lot of people, I say us, but a lot of people got that at the time. It's been fuzzed over. We've had a few 47 million more hours of Star Trek since then.
Right.
And these periods of re-examination are great, but in a lot of ways, the problems of the production of the motion picture, some of that bloatedness that should have been edited down or maybe propped up or pointed, that key, this simple feeling, the scene, some of those highlights, nothing else, the motionless picture. No, there's plenty to dig into in the motion. And I was just thinking, what's the tagline of the show? The human adventure is just beginning.
Just beginning. Yeah.
And yet the whole thing with the merging of Ilea and Decker and V'ger at the end, that's so Gene Roddenberry and so 70s-ish, and talk about big picture. But those main points kind of get snowed under by all of us trying to keep our eyes open through the endless reaction shots, because they didn't get a chance to edit effects, because that's what they had to show on the screen to win the sci-fi war in the late 70s.
I would say that it goes even a little bit beyond that. I would say that now that we're having this conversation, and it's actually interesting because it's something that I had not thought about, of Spock's kind of character arc, kind of starting with the motion picture. And I think, as you said, we have so many more iterations of Star Trek since the motion picture and to where we are now, that I feel like some of it, in some regards, kind of gets lost in the sauce, and you kind of lose sight of some of the more important character elements that happened in such a simple film, which really the motion picture is a very simplistic kind of story. But his character arc not only carried over into going forward in the Trek timeline, but also really connects back to what they're doing with Ethan Peck and Spock and Discovery, because it kind of relates to that. But a lot of people, I would say, even for myself, now it's like, we're talking about it, I hadn't really thought about it, but I'm sure other people haven't either, which is that what they did with him, a lot of people got upset about because they're like, oh, they're making Spock emo, or he's just always upset all the time, and that's not Spock's character. And it's like, well, actually, if you really go through it and actually look at all of the data points of Spock's character, it actually makes more sense for him to be acting that way during that time period. Now, yeah, you have the addition of the Michael Burnham dynamic and his sister that we didn't know about and all that stuff like that, but even taking that element out of it, the whole situations with his mom and being on Vulcan, like the way he was acting, I still feel like it would have been very much similar to what they're doing with Spock and Discovery, because it still connects back to who he was in the TOS and the motion picture. It's interesting to think about the fact that some of those details get lost, I think, over time, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. Yep.
Well, like in the cage, he had emotions.
I was going to say, Shouty Spock, yeah, it was first time out with the character, but Shouty Spock is always there to go back in mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
He's always had emotions. It's just that he has had to work harder than a full Vulcan to compose himself in a Vulcan manner. Right. So it's always there. They were hints at it throughout the original show. He had to work that much harder, mostly maybe he was seeking father approval or whatever, but he worked, to keep it under wraps. And every once in a while it peeked out around the edges. And I think what his mind meld with V'ger, and then the realization that the pursuit of pure logic and facts is not enough, it's just the beginning, kind of let him, like Dave said, be comfortable in his own skin. And that's what we see carried forward from that point forward through Star Trek II, and when he invokes little asides that he would have never done there in the original show. He's loosened up, basically. He's pulled the stick out.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
He's perfect,
Everybody
Savick.
in that movie needed
You
to do.
green-blooded.
Yeah. And I think they even tried to maybe have a little bit of fun with that at the end of the motion picture. I think it's the book about the making of, they talked about toward the end of that last scene where they're all on the bridge, and Scotty asks Spock if he wants to go back to Vulcan, and Spock basically says his task on Vulcan is complete. But there was supposed to be a little more. They experimented with that a little bit, and they tried to have some humor where he said, plus somebody has to keep an eye on Dr. McCoy, or it was something like that. And Robert Wise kind of just sort of shook his head like, nah, we're not going to do that.
I kind of would have loved that.
Yeah.
Well,
I remember at the end of Star Trek IV, the whale one, at the end when they're all splashing about and stuff, when the bird of prey's landed in San Francisco Bay, he's laughing in that.
Yeah.
And he's smiling. Yeah, laughing.
Nobody knows that he's got a gold medal in the triple Lindy in the Vulcan Olympics. That's a very little known fact of Vulcan trivia.
That giant white robe isn't going to stop him.
Larry will correct if this is wrong, because I bet he knows. But my impression was that was the cast actually playing with each other, and they filmed it and decided to leave it in. Is that correct,
that was
Larry?
that was
I
just
think that's
camera
true.
rolling. Exactly. Yeah. And and for the most part, it all worked. I was going to say, Dayton, just as an FYI, real quick, Dayton, you missed at the very beginning. We did a nice little homage to Dorothy.
Nice. Okay.
To mention. But again, just hearing us talk here the last few minutes, look what we're talking about, the broken Spock and the inner thing that a writer would want to latch onto as an inner conflict. And then talking about the daddy issues. Sarek is not part of this movie, of the motion picture. He becomes quickly a part of the movie series. But even thinking about the mind meld with Sarek, and then carrying that over to the mind meld with Spock, I started saying Leonard, with Nimoy, with Spock in Unification, and then which was kind of pointed up when Sarek died, in part one. But all these threads that are highlights of Spock's character, not to beat the Dorothy drum here too much, but again, it's just, these are major touchstones, and whether we get away from them for 10 years and we get back in our awareness, and Discovery has certainly got us back there. But anyway, I don't know where I'm going with this, but just let's step back and look at this and think about that.
For all the criticisms that audiences
and real quick, for all the younger for people just coming to Discovery, another reason to know who Dorothy was. It's like this moment I had where I was standing behind her at a con, and she walked out, and an Andorian guy was standing there cosplaying, and she just walked out, and she kind of just pulled herself up, and she goes, "You're an Andorian. I invented you." And it was just a funny little moment. And for anybody watching Discovery now, and the whole Sarek and Burnham and Spock triangle and what all that got into, which I thought was one of the best parts of the the one part of first season Discovery that stuck out to me that surprised me that I went, wow, was the reveal of Sarek manipulating the Vulcan Science Academy for both of his
that
kids
was awesome.
and how it blew up in
Yeah.
his face. And
Yeah.
that was the first
Yep.
time Discovery, I went, oh my God, I have a new layer to layer into the original to Journey to Babel.
Yep.
But
Yep.
anyway, but to tell a first-time Discovery fan that Dorothy Fontana, she invented that. It's like, you can thank her
Right.
for this whole daddy dynamic and exploiting that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's a naked time, but it's this side of paradise where you really got in and twisted the sword.
Yeah, for all the criticism of Discovery, I think for the people that are harshest on the show, you know, they don't recognize things like this, that especially with the Spock dynamic. In fact, you know, the complaints I've heard about this seem to be, you know, I ask the question, it's like, where have you been for the last 40 years? I mean, this is the evolution of Spock from beginning to end. You know, we saw how he behaved in the original series. We saw the crisis he went through in the motion picture, and we saw what kind of person he became from that when he really became comfortable with himself. Therapy worked for Spock is what it comes down to. Okay, it really did. And you know, it's like I noticed in the motion, after the motion picture especially, Spock is a different guy. Okay, like if we take away Search for Spock and The Voyage Home, Spock is a guy, for example, Spock is a guy that you would go into battle with. Spock is more, he seems more confident. He seems more command material. He's a captain in The Wrath of Khan, and he acts like a captain in The Wrath of Khan until he smartly hands over the reins to Kirk. And, you know, and then he knows his role. But it's like in The Undiscovered Country, when Kirk gets taken by the Klingons, he acts like he's been running that ship forever. He does an amazing job of commanding that in that episode. And I think it all has to do with how they developed the character into being unsure about himself and his place in the universe, and to being comfortable in his own skin. And so,
remember how he was as captain in Tholian Web?
Yes.
He came a long distance since then.
Yep.
Moving forward, next question. Because Larry, how much more time? I know we're getting close
15,
to your.
But I can leave and you guys can go on. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I wonder if it's fair to describe us today in 2019 as living again, perhaps in a motion picture moment where we have had a big splash motion picture or set of motion pictures in the JJ movies, but that ultimately didn't do well enough to keep going until now it looks like it may be. Are we seeing kind of the same sort of dynamic between these early JJ movies and now the Noah Hawley, Star Trek IV that is being proposed? And, you know, does it need to be a Wrath of Khan to JJ's motion picture?
Didn't we already do that? Isn't that what Into Darkness was? So.
You mean, you're being metaphorically or literally here?
Yeah.
What do you?
I gotta say, I didn't live through the original premiere, but 2009 was most certainly a motion picture event for me. I was extremely hyped through the entire build-up. Every time I saw one of the trailers for the movie, I was grinning ear to ear through the whole thing. And the first time I stepped into that theater, and it was the first time I'd seen Star Trek like that in theater. I'd seen all of the Next Gen films, of course, but that was Next Gen. That was something I grew up on. Next Gen was the foundation of my geekdom. This was something different and new. And I sat through that entire first viewing with a massive grin on my face. I couldn't wipe it away for hours afterward. And I must have seen it at least 5 times in a week and a half. I was also deploying at the time, so I needed to get it in while I was there. So I think we've had that motion picture moment with the JJ films. And I still kind of scratch my head at how some fans talk about those films. I understand they were disappointed with Into Darkness, so was I, but not to the point where I think that, it was a betrayal of Gene Roddenberry's vision. That's such a weak thing to say and such an easy criticism to pull up about something you don't even know how to articulate.
Right.
Especially since Gene isn't around anymore to articulate his vision personally.
So I don't think the upcoming movie needs to be a Wrath of Khan. It just needs to be a good movie, and it needs to be a good Star Trek movie.
Well, here I will get my thought on this is that I believe, first of all, out of the 3 films, JJ films, Beyond is my favorite, and I don't care what y'all say. Into Darkness is my second favorite. Okay, I like that film. As absurd as it is, I love that shit. So, and actually, I think the first one is out of the 3. I personally think it's the worst out of the 3. But here's the thing. It's just a dumb story, in my opinion, and it's like very predictable. But here's the thing: what I love about that film is that it's doing exactly the same thing that the motion picture did. It's bringing Star Trek. It brought Star Trek back from the dead, is what it did. I mean, let's be honest. After Enterprise aired that final episode in May of 2005, we were like, "Oh shit, we're done." The network was gone. There was no UPN anymore. There was no talk whatsoever about a new series taking its place. We were done. And then, what do we get 3 years later? Our last remnant of hope, Star Trek The Experience, gone. That's gone in Vegas. But here we have this movie that they're developing. Okay, and we're getting very little information about it. And then we really don't find out much really till about 4 or 5 months before. And then we're like all excited. And then we see it. It's like, that was a lot of fun. Not that really much like Star Trek, but it was a lot of fun. Everybody seems to like it. And look, people like Star Trek again. And so that's what I think.
It got people into the older shows.
That's exactly what it did. People wanted to learn about it, exactly, and it inspired a new audience that may not have ever cared about Star Trek. Look, my kids used to have a very difficult time, and they were younger back then, but they would have a very difficult time watching the original series. And
that's on you.
Well, no.
Has judged you.
Hey, I can only do the thing from the Clockwork Orange with the eyes wide open with the
Ludovico
so
technique. You sit right there, arena on 24/7.
It only works so often, but the point here is though that it really made Star Trek accessible to audiences that may never have even considered it before, and that's its real strength more than anything else.
It was the best gateway drug Trek ever had.
There you go.
They're fun films. The character interactions are amazing. I even Chris Pine as Kirk really grew on me. And let's be honest, Carl Urban is McCoy. It's like he's channeling DeForest Kelly.
Yes.
Holy cow. And just for those scenes, especially, and it all culminates in Beyond. I love what they do in Beyond, where they take 2 characters and they send them off on separate missions, almost like the Voyage Home. Like everybody's paired up differently, and they get these little tiny sub stories all going to the same thing. And
Jayla's such a fun character too.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great film, and like I said, I think as far as our moment for it being most picture, that's how I define it. As it opened the door for a new era of Trek. I mean, let's be honest. Do anybody think that Discovery, Picard, Section 31, the short treks, the lower decks, the new series on Nickelodeon, would any of this have been possible without the Abrams film in 2009? I don't think it would.
I think I would argue that it would happen eventually. I think
maybe eventually, yes. But
we have Discovery because CBS wanted a streaming service and to jump into that market. And what are they going to lead with?
Right.
That's why we have Discovery.
Yeah.
Because it's the family, just the way UPN led with Voyager in '95, or the way Paramount responded with Star Trek when there was a sci-fi war and we got to do one in '79. I mean, that's what was amazing, but after that, they're always going to look at Star Trek as the thing they lead for the new paradigm. So
but would they? But then I started asking questions like,
now the amount and the scope and who's doing it. That's all up for.
That's it. Right. Exactly. Would they have gone all in at $9 million per episode, like they have had that door opened for them? And that's the question. So I have to credit the Abrams films for a lot. For, like I said, most importantly, making Star Trek accessible to a new generation of audiences.
I can go with that.
I would go against the grain here really quick, and I would argue that Noah Hawley's Star Trek, I'm calling it Star Trek 4A personally.
I like that naming convention.
Yeah, so Star Trek 4A does need to be a cinematic Wrath of Khan moment for the franchise if they're continuing with the Kelvin films. If they want to make more, or even want to make more Star Trek films, I feel like it does need to be kind of that knock out of the park kind of film that just resonates with old Trek fans and a newer, generation of audiences, because Beyond was geared primarily, I think, in a lot of ways. I should say Beyond. The Kelvin movies were geared primarily in a lot of ways for bringing in new fans. Like Sean, like you just said, like it reinvigorated a whole new fan base and made it a little bit more accessible to, a more general audience, that got people interested in what was going on in the previous shows and the other movies and stuff. But I think this film has a lot of pressure on it to perform and kind of be a knockout of the park, not just for the studio, because they obviously want a financial win, but I think for future Trek films, especially since they're wanting to again go head to head with Star Wars and Disney. That's their focus here. We have streaming shows. You've got streaming shows. You've got movies. Well, we're going to make movies. I think if they want to play in that ballpark, this has to knock it out of the park. And I think it's on them at this point. I think after the Kelvin movies, people have had time to digest them, and I think a lot of people have come around to them over time. So I think that they've got a little bit more good favor on their side, but I think they really have to knock it out of the park. I think if it's just okay, I don't think that's going to cut it. And I think that might damage the television shows more than the film franchise if they're not careful. If they produce a major motion picture that's kind of just a dud or just okay, it may hurt the marketability and the attention and the buzz around some of the TV shows. So they got to be careful.
I don't know if that may have been, similar arguments were made back in the day when Next Gen was on TV and they were still making TOS films, and Next Gen was making films and DS9 was on TV. It's a different world now. There are people who don't even bother going to the movie theater anymore because they know it's going to be on Netflix or digital rental within 3 months of it being in the box office. It's a different dynamic. I mean, the whole thing about Star Trek being for free why pay for it, that dynamic's gone because we're all shelling out money for CBS All Access.
Yeah, we are.
And so, but I do agree that yes, it needs to be a solid film that attracts not just longtime fans, but it also has to be broad enough that it can bring in a general movie audience. That's the kind of money you're looking for. Everybody wants $1 billion movie now, and you can't make $1 billion Star Trek fan for the 8 of us.
Yep.
That are on this call.
I mean, I wouldn't mind if they did, but
I mean, they can. I would love them to death if they did, but it's not going to be
I can only see it so many times, guys. I can only carry the weight.
Right,
so much.
right. Yeah, I had help, of course, but
right.
So and that's the the line that it has to walk. It's got to be a cool Star Trek story that appeals to those of us that are in all the time, and then it's got to attract the casual moviegoer. What are we going to go see on a Friday night? Well, the Avengers movie's booked up. Let's go see Star Trek.
Right.
So it's that kind of world, and it's always been that kind of world. And Star Trek has not fared well compared to some of the other properties out there. I don't know that it necessarily needs to run and try to grab that brass ring, but
that is a Hollywood sort of concept, though.
Yeah.
Here's my property that's doing well, but I need it to do better because theirs is doing better.
But
But in fact, it could just be doing well, and that would be fine.
And now I have to cinematize it. If it's about a family, we have to get into first lead, second lead, and everybody else. We have to, alter that.
Beyond wasn't a failure. It just wasn't the success they wanted.
Right.
Good movie.
So it's a solid action movie. And again, people are like, why is Star Trek doing this? And I'm like, if Gene Roddenberry had that kind of money and that kind of resources in the 60s, he'd have totally done something like Beyond.
Right, exactly. I mean,
And by the way, as soon as he had budget, notice the Klingons looked really different.
Right.
Yeah.
They didn't tell us one as to why.
The spine heads.
They always look like that. Your TV sucked.
Okay, let's do a quick round robin. What image from the motion picture most sticks in your mind today, 40 years later, or for those of you who are younger since you saw it? What's the image you saw in this film that's, when you think of the motion picture, it's the one that comes up? Ross.
The flyby.
Flyby, okay. Dayton?
Yeah, the first shot of the Enterprise in the dry dock. That was what I was waiting for. I waited 25 minutes for that shot, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Larry?
This is so unfair. This is why
you want to come back to you?
Yeah, come back to me.
I'll come back to you, Sean.
Okay.
You had 40 years. How much time do you want, Larry?
I don't think in terms of these top 10, top 5, top 7. I don't do that. That's what I do.
I have a tie for different reasons. My dad took me to see the motion picture when I was 4 years old. Okay, and and he was never even a Star Trek fan. Never isn't till this day. And so, but the one thing that stands out in my mind from being with him and my Uncle Tim when we were in the theater, I remember the scene on the bridge when everything's flashing and Ilea is taken away. I'll never forget that scene. But the scene I always go back to when I think of the motion picture though is when Spock's is actually in V'ger and he's got in the jetpack and you're seeing all these effects.
A callback we see in Discovery, by the way, with Michael Burnham.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. And it's just such especially with the Jerry Goldsmith score in that. It's just so beautiful. I love it.
Son, how about you?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure everybody's going to hate me for this one, but the motion picture remains my top horror film that's not really a horror film. Because when I remember the motion picture, it's always the transporter malfunction.
Oh my God, that was my next question.
Oh my God, that was terrifying.
That was my next question.
All right.
I think still 40 years later, I think it gets the vote for the grisliest scene in Star Trek history.
Next to Conspiracy.
It's because you don't see anything. You have to imagine.
Imagine. Yep. Exactly. And then Galaxy Quest came back, and they showed us exactly what happened in Galaxy Quest. Yep,
and it exploded.
Dave, how about you?
The creature is inside out.
For me, it's Kirk grabbing Spock's hand, and Spock explaining that's a feeling that V'ger can't comprehend. That always sticks out to me. It's probably my favorite moment of the movie.
It's a great line. It's a wonderful scene.
Ketwolski.
Weirdly, the thing that sticks out to me the most is, I'll say two things when I think of the motion pictures. One, Spock going through V'ger in the spacesuit. That's probably the number one thing that sticks out in my mind when I think of the motion picture. And the second one is actually McCoy's sweet beard when he arrives. Thing that I think
they drafted me.
Yeah, and he has that sweet like pimp chain, and he's got like
and the hairy chest.
Yeah, he's totally chest. Fly.
Yeah. Right? And I just remember seeing that and just being like, "That's
literally."
The first thing he does is pat himself down to make sure everything's in place.
Yeah, exactly.
It's literally the most 1970s thing about that movie. The only thing that was missing was a shag rug and Burt Reynolds. That's all it was.
Like that's Burt Reynolds on his chest. Dayton, did I ask you already, Dayton? I didn't.
Yes, you did.
Oh, I did. Okay, sorry.
It's me.
I can change my answer if you want.
He likes the ship porn.
Right. Ship porn, 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, Larry, back to you, then me.
Okay, I have to. So, yeah, either the McCoy arrival or the Spock arrival on the bridge when they do why, it's Mr. Spock. And, so help me, I'm actually glad to see that moment when Spock comes in and it feels like that should be the reunion moment. And then something is like way off kilter, and you've got everybody all lined up, and Kirk, Spock, Chapel, and it's like, oh look, we're going to resume the Chapel Spock thing. No, we're not. It's like, and there's just something subtly unsettled. It's like, here you go, guys, 10 years, and it's your reunion. And I know that's a very anticlimactic moment, but I'm sitting here trying to think of something. It's like that. And
that's a great moment.
It really is.
The other thing is, I have to say this, and this is like my memory of seeing it tonight. The opening shot of the 3 Klingon cruisers coming at you.
You stole mine, dude.
Hey, listen, but it's like, it comes in. So I'm with my 4 years younger little brother, our group that had to wait a day to see it, right? So it's on 40 years ago. And I'm in the theater, and I don't even realize it, but as they come creeping toward, in a very non-Star Wars way, unless you're thinking about the destroyers, they come and then they do the flip over pan. Mm-hmm. And And I didn't know I was doing this, but I was basically, I guess, about 4 rows ahead of me, craning. And all of a sudden, I feel this hand. My little brother, my nerd brother, has his hand on my chest, pushing me back in my seat from the side. He's like, "Will you sit back? You're embarrassing me." And I'm like, we waited not 10 years. We waited 4 or 5 years for this. That's but funny. I got to say, don't overlook that, because it was like, oh, my God, this is actually cinematic. Because we've got really detail in the models. But anyway.
That is why Yeah, like the little wings that they added to it and the texture to the hull.
All the greebles
yeah.
on the hull. Yeah.
The
Yeah,
greetings are beautiful.
for me, that opening scene really, it was one of the best cold opens in Star Trek, I think.
And the theme and the Klingon theme. And
Yes,
that,
and that
to
was
that day.
you're stealing all my stuff, Larry.
Well, I only
the
steal from
Klingon
the
theme,
best.
which I think survives today as the most signature Klingon kind of leitmotif that Star Trek has. And and then once you move inside and you see these new and very different Klingons that still were like, yeah, this is how Klingons always should have been. That was
like
for me.
4.
Yeah, that was for me.
I told
that was
you.
what said Star Trek is back. We got Klingons with even cooler ships and speaking in an alien language, and
First time we'd heard it.
destruction. It was great.
Yep.
It made you want to see what was behind all of this. All right, I think we got everybody. Yes. Okay, so let's do. I'm curious. Sun already stole my transporter accident question, but I have another transporter question. And Justin, thank you for putting up that footage as we've been talking about it. One of the things that actually was a pet peeve of mine from the motion picture was the transporter effect, which looks like flower power. It looks like these little flowers going up and down, which took away a little bit from the grisliness of the transporter accident. But I felt like it was a pretty big fail. And as I was thinking about this last night, I actually went through, I found this thing on YouTube that actually shows all the different transporter effects from all the different iterations of Star Trek. So I'm curious, number one, did you like the flower power transporter effect in the motion picture? And number two, what would you vote as the best transporter effect in all of Star Trek, including the JJ verse? Ketwolski.
I was unprepared. Yeah, seriously. Did I think the effect in the motion picture worked? Yeah, it didn't bother me at all. I didn't have any issues with it. I thought it was fine. In fact, I don't think I really even paid much attention to it, to be honest. I definitely watched the melting of their science officer, but I don't think I paid attention to the effect.
And Navigator.
And the Navigator, right, exactly. So which effect do I think is the best? Yeah. Don't hate me for saying this, but I would actually say that I like the JJ style. I like how it like wraps them up and it's like kind of like pulling them in, and it just screams like this is a transporter, and it's just like a fun animation to kind of bring a little bit of action to something that is normally rather mundane, where it's just like a light like kind of moving apart and then there they are, or like just kind of materializing. I thought it was a cool way to kind of spice that particular transition up. So I like that the most.
Okay, Justin, how about you?
What?
Did you think the flower?
We're looking at it.
Did you think the
Justin,
flower
welcome to the show.
power transporter effect worked in motion picture? And in addition to that, what do you think is
For
what is
what
your
it
favorite?
was, yes. But I gotta agree with Ketwolski on this one. The JJ verse one's a lot better.
Okay, Larry.
I didn't think about it. There's so much in the motion picture that I just went, okay, it's 10 years later. They're spending movie budgets on it because they can and they want to. But over time, it's not my favorite at all. And if I don't like the JJ one because isn't it like a sparkle?
Yeah,
I mean a
it's
spiral.
like a spiral. Yeah,
Spiral, yeah.
I forget. I want to say it's the Ferengis, but either the Ferengis. I mean, Next Gen, the Berman era, they tried to give all the cultures their own distinctive
Their own, yep.
transporter.
So did they
And
in the
it's either
original
Klingon
series?
or Ferengi. So it always when
The
I saw the
Ferengi.
JJs, I went, yeah, it's kind of Ferengi-ish to me. So yeah, I don't.
Yeah, it's the Ferengi.
I don't think about unless it's sentimentally. Just who is it that has the three-part rings that all fill in together? Is that
I think that's Voyager.
Voyager?
think that would
Maybe,
be
but
it.
I don't know. I just want to know who in Starfleet's getting their jollies by like the transporter effect must be changed every 6 months. Memo that goes out apparently.
So it's a jobs program, okay?
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's the same department as the uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
Dayton, how about you?
Yeah, it didn't work for me, the motion picture. But I mean, we only saw it for that brief minute, and then obviously we decide we're not going to use transporters anymore because of what happened. As far as my favorite, I'm gonna go with I'm going to go with the JJ ones because it just feels like they're actually no, the animated one's the best one. No, I like the JJ effect because it just feels like there's a sensation of this barely harnessed energy that's just barely under control is tearing your body apart and then sending you on your way, which of course is why McCoy is always freaked out about it. But it just seemed like it's a pretty lackadaisical effect on some of the shows. Like it's a matter of fact, whereas on the JJ, he tried to bring something to it that's more energetic and more exciting, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I mean, you can almost believe you're being pulled apart by that thing.
All right.
Yeah,
Dave?
but McCoy's not wrong.
Yeah, where's the lie? No lies detected. Yeah.
Dave, how about you?
Yeah, I was not a big fan of that particular transporter effect. I didn't see the flower power in it necessarily. It just seemed like, I guess, blooming. So
Blooming, yeah.
blooming light and stuff. So maybe, but I until the JJ movies, I think my favorite was actually Next Gen.
Oh, really?
And I do love that even in the original series, the Klingon transporters looked harsh and red and nasty.
But at least different, which I
At
liked.
least different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
different technology, one would assume. But I agree with Dayton. JJ's effect seems, especially as they're landing from a fall on the transporter pad and some sparkle flies up. It's just energetic and a lot of fun, and I like it to be fun.
Great. Ross.
That's a very hard question because it's kind of hard for me to
We all answered it.
visualize
You can
all the
answer it.
different transporter effects from the decades of Star Trek. I'm going to go off the beaten path and say Star Trek 25th Anniversary. It had the pixelated effect was pretty cool, but also at the end
Everyone's
Like a
rushing to
video
Google and YouTube. That up.
As the silhouette disappeared, there was a little spiral at the end that I really liked.
What are
Russ
you
gave us-
talking about?
Russ
video
gave us
game.
the video
Oh,
game. Russ gave us.
oh.
Yeah.
Russ decided to give us an answer Son would give. Is what he just said.
That's a seriously deep cut right there.
Like I said, I was going off the beaten path.
Yep.
Okay, you win for beaten path.
You were out
Son,
in
do you
the
want to
cow
add?
pasture.
Son, top that.
Top that, son.
I can't top that. I haven't played like all of these video games, but
the KFC commercial. Go with the KFC commercial.
I am definitely gonna make Larry mad because I
You
actually
two has
like,
ruined this film.
I like the Ferengi transporter from the Next Generation.
I didn't say I disliked it. I was just trying to remember it. Oh, I didn't. It's fine. Works for them.
But
go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, the first one with the Ferengi energy whip and the teleporter sequence was blue at that point for them, and it had that one wisp around. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one more than a lot of the ones. Now, a close second is the lateral transporter from Discovery, from Georgiou's ship.
Which has some elements of that spiral thing too, doesn't it?
I believe so, but it's more the backlighting of the, the transporter
Carlos,
pad being stood up.
I don't know if you know it, but they're actually mandated contractually to utilize all 25% of the.
Oh my god, that's funny.
Let's see if Sean, did I ask you yet? I haven't asked you yet.
No, I'm gonna go for
Chomping at
the
bit.
TNG era one here, and only for the reason that I think a lot of times I notice with the transport, it seems to go on way too long. It's like, okay, get it done, get to the point. It's a device to get you from here to there. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's never that big of a deal to me. It's clean, it's simple. It seems it's very how do I say this? It's very almost like modular, like Next Gen is. It's just very clean and gets the job done, and that's it. It's always worked for me, that particular one.
That's actually what I didn't like about the Next Gen transporter. I just thought that the parallel lines coming down were just a little too on the nose.
Yeah,
I did like that they kept the sparklies from the original series on top of that. But for me, I invite you to take another look at the transporter effect in The Wrath of Khan, which it has the same sort of sense of motion that you see in the JJ movies, but it has at the end this like little trail of little sparkles after they finish materializing that I just think gave it this kind of organic effect that I think you all liked I see why you like that in the Kelvin movies, but it's not overly complicated, but it
was
get
good in
this
Wrath of
sense
Khan.
of dynamism that I thought worked really well.
That's a part of you that the transporter left. Think about that. When you wake up and your pinky toes gone, you know that's because that little sparkle floated it away.
Don't say that.
We should probably say though that the original version of the transporter effect, we should give it its just due because it was an amazing feat for that era, born out of necessity. For them to come up with something like that, and then everybody else has refined it, improved it. I wouldn't say reinvented, but they've added on to it over the years. But for what they had to work with and the time they had to do it in, with the resources at their availability, it's a pretty sharp looking effect for 1960s TV.
Who else in Wrath of Khan was blown away by them talking within it?
Yeah, that was what I loved about it. It was the first time we saw people actually talking and moving while they were transporting.
Right. Can't do nothing until they're done sparkling.
Yeah.
I always wondered how somebody didn't lose a hand by sticking it too far outside the column.
I know Discovery's got back to that too, but that's always bugged me because if it's like this is still no matter how everyday it's gotten to be in people's consciousness, unless you're McCoy or whatever era, or Archer era. But if it's going to be that routine, then I don't know. Just the fact that it's the motion seems to go away from all the technology that's implied, but then you explain anything. My thing is just that I wish we could. I was kidding about the Starfleet order every 3 months, but that's the thing that always bugged me was that. And Sean, they would be shocked to hear you say this. Every effects team, it's like number one thing on our list is come up with a new. It's like whatever else we do, we've got to come up with a new cool. Oh look, I just saw this app, this gizmo. Let's do a new transporter with it. It's like really because so you've got the trilogy of the 3 movies that are supposed to be within 6 months of each other, and there's quasi different transporters in each one. That's the big thing that bugs me. But motion picture.
Rule.
The
25%.
Hey, let's talk about that's more like 75% rule. But back to motion picture, and I'm trying to madly remember this now, but for a long time, it was like one of those, we've got budget, let's spend it. And then I think someone went, this is stupid because it gets in the way of drama. They thought they needed like a radiation wall in front of the console in motion picture in the transporter room. Mm-hmm. And I think that went away.
I think it's if there's a bad beam up and something's going splat.
That's what I was thinking. You gotta have a flash shield there.
Well, they had it in 2009 and
it's like a backsplash on an oven in a kitchen.
No sneeze guard on the salad bar.
That's it.
It's like when you go to get an X-ray done and the technician immediately runs behind that wall.
And
that's not reassuring at all.
Yeah. This isn't dangerous. Where are you going?
I'm madly trying to remember seeing Chris and them sitting. 09 does have a wall, but that's Kelvin, so it doesn't count. So it's not prime.
Undiscovered Country they had when they redressed the TNG set.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's right.
Okay.
I got everyone on that last question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, no, I think we went far enough down the rabbit hole of nerddom on that one. So,
we had to have one of those. Okay, so now we're going to go to more of a commercialization piece. What is or was your favorite piece of motion picture merch?
Oh my God!
Don't ask me.
I didn't have any, so.
Yeah, you have to have been old enough to have bought it, right?
Well, okay.
I could say the Happy Meal because I've seen the ads for it.
They were pretty good. Yes.
They were pretty tasty. Yeah.
I had my great grandfather bought me. He lived in North Carolina, and we went down to visit him one year when I was 5. So this was right after the motion picture. He had like a big care package of all the toys and stuff he bought from a general store for us, and I got a 3 3/4 inch Spock figure. I think it's about that size of the action figure. I still have that action figure to this day. And it's one of my most prized possessions. And this is long before I was ever a Star Trek fan. I also have a plushie, a couple of plushes of Kirk that I got from when I bought a big Star Trek collection once, and they're kind of horrifying. And because the body's all plush, but it's got a plastic molded head of William Shatner on top of it. Those are kind of fun. Although they are pretty.
That's
terrifying.
actually what he looks like today now.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Very plushy.
Plush with a plastic face.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Spock figure I have is, again, it's still my favorite. It's probably more nostalgic for me than anything else. So,
Larry, you've got to have a favorite piece of motion picture merch.
Oh, well, it would have just the books, basically, what they did for that they never did again because they spent such a wad on licensed items. But if it's talking about fandom and fun in the moment and rare, I'm going to say my soundtrack album, but not for what you think, because for a long time, the soundtrack album was the only way friggin' got to see all the aliens and their IDs outside of just the listing in the making of, in Susan's
Still have
making
my
of
copy
book.
of that.
Very cool.
Yeah, like if nothing else, like I'll give you the album, but I need the sleeve.
Yeah, I also have that, so I don't know if that counts as well.
There you go.
Yeah,
Vinyl is back.
I had the visual handy.
Mine is in storage, but I have mine too. Dayton, how about you?
I'm gonna play with the formula a little bit. I'll give you two because I've tied, and then I've got the weirdest piece of Star Trek motion picture merch. All right, so for favorite, I'm going to go with what Larry said. I've got there was a book that came out when the movie, it was called Spaceflight Chronology.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
And
I've got that.
It was laid out like those Terran Trade Authority books, where it was a future history, and it was pretty cool. And then I still have the one sheet that they handed out. My father, of all people, who to this day hates Star Trek and never understood it, and cannot believe that I actually get paid to do anything related to it, brought me a rolled copy because they were handing them out by they had stacks of them in this convention center that he was doing an expo thing at, and he brought me a rolled copy of the one sheet, the rainbow poster, and I still have that thing framed on my office wall to this day. Now, for the weirdest piece of Star Trek merchandise, I have a decanter that looks like Spock's head that they use for whiskey decanter. So that's by far the most bizarre piece of merch I own.
Justin, did you have one?
Actually, I have the same album, but it's also in storage. I got a phasers somewhere. I think that's also in storage. A lot of my stuff.
I hated the motion picture phasers.
Oh yes, they're horrible. They're horrible.
But it's actually pretty cool from the as far as phasers. The water pistol phaser was a pretty good recreation of the actual.
Yeah,
phaser,
I forgot about that.
It's pretty good. It's still catches a mint on eBay too because it is such an accurate piece. It's a very simple, plain phaser. I mean, it's not a lot of detail though, so they could do it's real easy to convert to a squirt gun.
Dave, how about you?
I know I had some of the action figures. I'm not a collector of things. Anything that I had back then, my parents threw out long ago. And even today, I have like a couple of Starship models, and that's about it. So nothing sticks out in my mind that I had, other than I know I had Kirk and Spock, and I think Sulu and a couple of the others. And I kept losing. I think they came with little phasers, and I kept losing them.
Yeah, they did.
It would have been about that big.
Yeah, little blue tiny phasers. Let's see. Did I miss anyone?
I don't think so.
Oh, nice. Yeah, shout out to. Okay, so here is mine. I'm going to share this with you guys. It is.
I do have the chronology. By the way.
Yeah. Peel off graphics book, and I got in so much trouble because I did peel them off, and I put them up all around the house. Like the bathroom was the transporter room. I love that.
That's amazing.
Thing,
I love the
up-down arrow
transporter
and
graphic, by the way. That's so awesome.
They still use some of these. Some of these
graphics
still show up. They've been slightly modified, but I think the transporter one is probably
transporter gets used.
one.
Yeah.
It's been used forever.
The question is are they still using that sweet bowling pin one? I mean,
I'm not sure what's going on with that one, but
so Lee Cole was this enigma, and they brought her back, and she worked like the last couple of years of Enterprise, and I got to meet her, and I was like, oh my god! And I had her sign my sticker book and everything. But she was talking about how to do that book, they did signage for the motion picture, but then they needed like a ton more, and she just made up crap
Right.
that was never on film for the book. And I think that's the bowling pin legacy there.
Didn't she also do like a pamphlet or a booklet that they used on set that identified what the controls were on the different consoles?
Well,
Didn't
she and
do
Rick,
something?
they did
the Enterprise
yeah.
flight manual. That's what
All
it
the
was.
we did a check files on it. But yeah, if you were, I mean, and Lincoln sold those for years.
Mhm.
It was amazing because it was
I might
actually, it
have
was like
one
a
in
real
box
life
somewhere.
tech manual, but it was all the practical. It's how to run all the practical effects on the console. They spent so much money that never. I mean, those alien costumes and all the. When they had the Christie's auction in 06, and I finally got to the warehouse, there was like a 50-yard long thing because they built all those costumes for the motion picture and then never used them again. Like they didn't even like put here's so and so from 20 years ago wearing an old outfit, right? Like you never saw a motion picture outfit reused anywhere. Okay, maybe Spock's robe.
Paramount.
Well, I think that they were reused primarily for whenever the TNG crew had to go to sleep. So I think that's what, because there's
those were awful pajamas. I
It was just
remember.
the amount
they
of
didn't,
money to spend because it's a motion picture and we can spend it.
I'm surprised they didn't repurpose at least
God
parts of it.
awful.
Right.
I'm surprised
Dayton,
they
what
didn't
were you
repurpose.
saying?
I was gonna say I can't believe they didn't repurpose at least portions of them for background aliens on one of the
That's what I
shows.
mean.
'Cause-
The way you keep
Yeah,
seeing
I
the
mean,
maroons show up. Oh,
right.
it's Jack Crusher.
Right.
Oh, it's here's the sea crew. Yeah.
because they were notorious for being able to stretch a buck.
Yeah, but for some reason maybe the material they used was horrible, or it went to moths, or I don't know. But it was amazing to see 50 yards of never seen, never out in the light motion picture costume, all in their bland beige, brown, white glory. Most of
Gotta
them.
admit though, that's kind of a sweet belt buckle.
Yeah. Here's a nerd question:
No belts.
how many people know what that belt buckle was for?
Was
Really?
that
Bioscience, isn't it?
Do
Yeah,
this for a
bio.
living, yeah.
we do this for a living.
Okay, so here's my second to last question. What
was the belt
tech
buckle
from the
for?
motion picture did you like the most and that you think still looks great 40 years later?
Say that again. The
Yeah.
first part of it.
What
broke up.
technology that we saw in the motion picture do you think that really struck you and do you think still works 40 years later, like still looks good?
I mean, I can totally answer that. The first thing that pops into my head is the Captain Kirk stabilizing leg braces that he lays over himself. If the ship stops suddenly, I assume it would rip him apart. But yeah, I think that's totally still super.
That's a
Nicely done.
very good answer.
The top half of Kirk.
Yes.
The captain is on the view screen. What do you mean? I mean, he's literally on the view screen.
Yeah,
now.
his legs are still in the chair though, but they did not move. So
Nope.
Yeah, he's been torn apart from the waist up, but his legs are okay.
Everything's good.
But it was
Everything's
there.
good.
Now see this revisionist thinking. How many years did they get laughed at for having no seatbelts?
No seat
and then they
belts,
put
right, exactly.
seatbelts in, and then Mike and Rick go, "Oh, inertial dampers, guys, inertial dampers." Oh, okay.
And we
how
don't
it's-
see him again until 2009.
I don't know. I always looked at it
Well,
as
no,
like,
they had
this
it
is
in
dark.
the
Into
would-be
darkness.
seat the would-be seat in Nemesis, the new chair, that would have
Right.
gone.
yeah.
I always
Right.
looked at it like it's like the bus. I mean, if a
That's the
bus
international symbol for.
if a bus gets into a fiery accident or a wreck here, does the seatbelts really
The seatbelt
matter?
isn't going to help you.
I mean, I think Enterprise, come on, if that thing crashes, you're doomed.
Listen,
Forget
Sean, you tell it to the guy that got blown out of the front view screen after he got exploded and started.
it. It's Nemesis,
Oh,
right?
that's right.
Yeah, you tell it to that guy. You tell it to him.
Tell it to his face.
Yeah, tell it to his stupid space face.
Anyone else
The
tech
ship.
that you liked from motion picture?
The model of the ship itself is probably
Yeah.
it's probably my favorite ship, although I gotta say the Disco Enterprise I really love, and of course I love the original. And the Disco Enterprise is almost a cross between
Yeah.
the original and the movie Enterprise.
Yeah,
That's probably
it is.
why I love it. But that ship looks fantastic,
Oh, it is. It's
It's
so
awesome.
beautiful. Yep.
and it looks like a spaceship that you could have in any science fiction movie today.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
I as far as what I think the technology called, I think in general, I think the film, I'd say honestly, this may sound crazy, but 90% of the technology, I think it still works today for me. I think there's such a massive jump between what was on TOS in what came from the motion picture, that I can suspend enough disbelief pretty easily to accept that this is 200 years in the future, even in 2019. Some of the I think we would probably want to, if we were to ever redo this or ever like clean this up, you'd want to redo some of the graphics on the display screens and things like that. But overall, I think it still kind of all works. Yeah. I think they've done a very good job of future-proofing this for the most part.
I agree.
For me, I liked the tricorder. It was compact. And, as opposed to the one that you saw in Wrath of Khan, where everything ballooned. The communicators were huge. The tricorder was like this big, massive thing that Savick carries around on the regular 9 space
They rented
station.
that. They didn't even build that from scratch.
Oh, really? Really? Yeah,
What
everything
is that
just
thing?
ballooned. Everything was bigger. But I really liked the compact, sort of iPhone-sized tricorder that you saw in the motion picture. I like that a lot.
I'm actually Googling Wrath of Khan tricorder because I don't remember it.
In the fact,
I did it myself, and
it's one of those for the fact files. We were researching things so artists could redo things, and we could not. We had access to all the drawings, and there was no drawing for that tricorder. It was this puzzle, and I forget how we came to it, but I can't remember if it was Penny Juday through Herman or somebody said, "Oh, we rented that," and I went over, and lo and behold, it was rentable 10 years ago. Yeah, they painted it. They
It's basically
they platinumized it.
Yeah, that's very ugly.
Yeah,
Same thing as
it's a handheld cement mixer is what it is basically.
Yeah, I mean it's huge. It's like a Borg implant size.
So that got retconned as the planet, the landing party field tricorder or something, industrial strength tricorder.
Yeah, I guess. Although they
so
still have the best
jackets.
jackets.
Wrath of Khan was filmed in Texas, right? Everything's bigger in Texas.
Oh, right. Gotcha.
Okay.
Actually, my favorite piece of technology from the. Oh wait, I'm jumping to. We're thinking Wrath of Khan. Forget this. Okay, motion picture. Somebody else taking.
That's a different video.
Yeah.
We should probably give a head nod to the sick bay technology. The big scanner bed they use when they are looking at ILEA. I mean, they credit
it's crazy.
It is pretty cool, but I mean, they credit the original show for some advances that were made in real medicine with the bio bed and the little monitor and all that. So I don't know if what they did in the motion picture, obviously they were limited by tech, but I still thought it was a pretty cool effect. I don't know if that was responsible for inspiring somebody to come up with, some of the scanning systems that we have now and CAT scans and whatnot. But I thought at the time that was pretty cool when they were drilling down to the microscopic level with her little processor pumps and all that stuff that they were talking about.
Osmotic micropump. It's all of Dr. Chappell's best lines.
yeah, really. It was pretty much her whole shot right there.
Oh, much, yeah. That's it. And the welcome of Spock. That was it.
And let's not forget the self-actuating headrest on the chairs on the bridge. That automatically position themselves when Kirk sits down. He's like, "Oh yeah, you look tired."
Your car has that now.
Yeah.
The most interesting bit of technology for me was probably the rec deck on a relatively large ship. That whole, how much did 700 people?
No,
more?
430. It was basically the same
30. Okay,
series, yeah.
But still, to allocate that much space for the sole purpose of crew recreation and morale is a really big deal for me.
And that table that lights up was awesome.
Yeah, true. The fact that Starfleet is ensuring that the crew has that kind of space, it was really striking to me.
Yeah, but you come from the Navy where they give you like 4 feet of space, right?
Yes, exactly.
For anything
for
and you had to hot bunk that depending on what ship you're on.
Yes, I did.
What's like
I had to share a bunk with 2 nasty people.
That's when you know who your real friends are.
At the same time?
No, we were on 8 hours. We share a rack 6 hours at a time. I'd take it. I had 2 racks. I'd be in it for 6 hours to sleep. Then would be vacant for another guy to pop in, and you can alternate so you don't have to wake up the other guy.
Yeah, they didn't have to hot bunk together, but
no,
it was one of the benefits.
They were the same.
On a submarine that nights get lonely.
They didn't pay him much, but the perks were worth it. Is what you're telling me, right?
Yeah.
Your foot locker here, put all your stuff in there.
The locker was underneath the rack. So if one of the other guys needed to get something out of his rack, it was either lift me up while I was still inside or boot me out.
And
So,
this,
any other
guys, is why
technology
you
that anyone
have
wants
the
to
Archer era and all the
talk about?
zippers.
Did we cover the communicator at all?
Yeah, I hated the wrist communicators.
Yeah, I never liked it.
Frank
Yeah.
Dixon,
I always
was
thought
glad
Dick
when they went
Tracy.
back to the flip.
And I know
Um,
Dick Tracy's.
It was kind of like the most pointless plot device of the whole thing. Like, wait a minute, do you have a flip communication? Why did they do that?
Well, what I did like about him is that they didn't go like this to do it. They were all like this.
Mm.
So it was always
Cool,
you talk
not
into-
cool.
like that.
Cool. right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I did
I'm
like
glad
that
you're
about
catching
it.
on.
It's like
All
a
right.
spy.
I did like that about it.
Sure.
The one of the things that I just remember as a random hilarious moment that made me laugh out loud in the theater when I saw it, it still does when I see it today, is when they're in the wormhole scene and you see that visual effect where everything's sort of like
Time dilation or
multiply
whatever.
time dilation thing, and their voices are dilated too, and then they're sort of like slow motion, and that mostly works except in one part, which is when
Leah.
Chekhov launches the photon torpedo and he goes torpedo away. I was like, oh my god, that sounds terrible.
The whole scene was just so drawn
Torpedo
out.
away.
Wonder how long it took him to film that without cracking up.
Photon torpedo. He's like torpedo away.
I mean, I don't know, but I'm guessing they filmed it at normal speed and then
Yeah.
just slowed it down.
I would think so, yeah.
I would hope, because otherwise it's absurd. It's absurd.
So we're almost out of time. So quick last question I'm curious about. How many of you read the novelization and did it change your view of the motion picture?
I think I did, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I did at the time, but I don't remember it.
They had it on sale like a couple of days early ahead of the launch.
Yep,
and
it
I
was
thought,
ahead of the
oh my
launch.
God, who screwed up on this? And went down and read it. And same thing on Wrath of Khan. But so which may have softened the blow of, you couldn't deny that you fell asleep in Act 3 maybe. But
How did they describe the
softened the
minutes
blow.
and minutes of clouds?
Pages and pages.
pages
of
and
it, very
pages,
cloudy.
right?
Yeah.
Basically,
hired
chapter
George R. R.
3,
Martin.
chapter 4, chapter. Yeah.
I read it when it came out because, like Larry said, it came out ahead of the movie, and then I read it a few times in the years right after the movie, and then I didn't revisit it again for years. But they re-released it again earlier this year, just a couple of months ago, and they did an audiobook version for the first time. So I listened to the audiobook, and there are passages that I remember liking from way back when, but I'd forgotten about them for years. And when I heard them again, it reminded me that, yeah, there are little bits and pieces sprinkled throughout the book that kind of add to various scenes. Like there's
Well, the whole epilogue.
going back to the thing about the whole epilogue is awesome, but like going to the
Yeah.
part we're talking about Spock's character, there's a line in there where he's about to undergo the Kolinar deal, and he's in front of the Vulcan masters, and he's reminding himself about what Kirk used to try to tell him. You're always trying to decide one side of your heritage over the other. Why not try to be the best part of both? That's a great line. It's perfect coming from somebody like Kirk or McCoy. And you don't hear it in the movie, but it adds just a little bit of narration because he's actually fighting it. Like, okay, I'm about to say goodbye to all you bastards. I'm never going to be emotional again. I'm never going to let myself think about you ever again. And then the cloud touches him, and we're off and running. So there are little bits. It's not a very good or well-written book.
Well, it was written by Gene Roddenberry himself.
Right.
So
Well, I mean, it's a first-time novel by a first-time novelist, or it's a first
Yeah,
novel by a
yeah.
first-time novelist, and it reads just like that. However, it's Roddenberry, so we're going to cut him some slack.
okay.
And more
I-
more footnotes than any other novel you ever saw in your life.
I don't remember footnote. Are there footnotes in the book?
There are footnotes
Oh, yes.
throughout that book.
Oh,
Yeah.
every little thing he wanted to talk about for 10 years. Is in
Maybe
there.
I
The other
didn't
thing-
read it.
The other thing about it is when the illustrious transporter accident happens and everybody's dying, I knew because I read the book that was Lori Ciani over there, who was his marriage
Right.
contract wife for a
Right.
while, who was an
I think-
admiral.
I think there might be a couple of footnotes that have their own footnotes.
footnoted footnotes.
Footnotes of footnotes.
Yeah.
I liked actually the scene where where Kirk goes into Admiral Nagura and demands that he get the Enterprise. I thought that was,
Yeah, I wish they'd filmed that.
it would have been a great thing to
Right.
see. They refer to it in the movie, but you
It was
actually
in
get to see
earlier
it in the book.
drafts. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember David Gerald's column in Starlog talking about, I just saw the Nagura. I think they auditioned with we just got into some of this stuff. I think they used some of those lines for audition lines, and I know it was a scene in the In Thy Image draft. You know, when it was going to be the pilot for the phase 2.
I
So
think
yeah,
I think if you're interested at all in the film, it's worth reading. Only because it's written by Roddenberry, who knew these characters better than anybody at that point in time. So it's definitely worth a read and a revisit. But it is a product of its time, and you know, some of Roddenberry's ideas about what he wanted to see in Star Trek are they could be a little
They were a
amusing.
little weird.
It could be a little weird, yeah, but
Yeah.
it was okay though. I mean, it's an interesting snapshot of where Star Trek could have been if they had gone to series. Like if they'd gone to that phase 2 series that they were talking about, these are some of the things we may have seen in episodes of that show that never happened. And he repurposed a couple of things that are referenced in the book. You see them in a different form in Next Gen, particularly early Next Gen. So it's a nice little artifact of that era of Star Trek. It's worth it if you're at all interested in the film.
All right. We are just about out of time. So how about final thoughts? Anything you want to say? And it's got to be short, folks, before we go. Larry?
I hope we do. I hope Darren and the guys went out on this project to HDify their director's cut. Would be
I'd
good
love
because
to see that.
everybody's main takeaway of the movie, above everything else, or what's hidden, is the bloated feeling of it. And if they could just tighten it up without worrying about anything else, just for the good of the movie, tighten it up, it would be good. Other than that, just remember that this movie will and forever be unlike any other Star Trek movie because for Star Trek and for pop culture, for media.
Yep. Okay, good point. Ketwolski.
I would just encourage anyone who's watched our discussion here or who's on the fence and hasn't actually watched the motion picture because you've heard it's the most boringest one and it's terrible. I would encourage anyone to block out maybe even a couple of days if you want to break it up, but to watch it. as we've kind of talked about and kind of, broken down a little bit in this discussion is this film has so much impact on the franchise that we're still feeling to this day. And I think if you want to get really invested in what's going on with current Star Trek and feel how things have kind of evolved over time, I think this is a great starting point for anyone who's interested in doing that. So I love this movie. I love it for what it is. And I usually watch it at least once a year. So I hope that if you're on the fence, that this pushes you over it and you go and watch it.
On Arbor Day, or is there just whenever I feel like it?
Just whenever I'm like, oh, do I have 15 hours?
Okay, Dave, how about you? Parting thoughts.
I agree with Ketwolski that you sometimes have to break it up a little bit. I watched it in preparation for this recently, a week or so ago, and I kept having a child come into the room and interrupt me. So that sort of broke it up. I've watched it in like 3 or 4 parts, and at one point, the oldest came in and said, "Are there still clouds going on? What is happening? Is it still on?" And I said, "Honey, we will. When you have a better attention span, we will watch this movie together."
Dayton, how about you? Parting thought.
I don't know if it's been covered because I was late, obviously. But another shout out for Jerry Goldsmith's score.
We did not talk about it, and I'm glad you bring it up.
Absolutely, listen. If you can spare the change, go to La La Land and get the extended version of the CD or the 3 CD set. It's gorgeous. That music has never sounded better.
A quick question.
And it also has the alternative takes too.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm back in
Sean,
business.
go ahead.
Okay, good. I lost power. Sorry about that. Quick question for Dayton on that score. I have the 2 disc that has 1 disc with the music and the second disc of Gene Roddenberry talking on it. This is not the set you're talking about.
No, this is a completely different set. That it's basically the complete score for the film, along with alternate cues and versions of the music that Goldsmith experimented with while they were developing the score. It's a 3 CD set. It's different from the one that you're talking about. I have that same set, but this is this came out a couple of years ago from La La Land.
I'm looking forward to getting it now. So
all right,
Whoever's
Neil
up
Bulk,
next.
you owe me a commission for that.
Okay, Justin, parting thought?
Yeah, we just had a fire alarm go off here. Yay. Yeah, I mean, DMP is one of the ones I usually send people to watch. But if I am introducing them to Star Trek, I tell them to watch 2009 first because it's more modern take on it, but I tell them, like, make sure you have enough attention span to actually watch the motion picture, because of the whole falling asleep thing in the third act. I mean, you gotta be a diehard fan to be able to sit through the whole thing and not fall asleep at least once.
All right, son.
Definitely take a second thought for all of the really long shots. And, yes, they're really boring and long for some people. But if you sit and watch it, and as much as people go on about that, just sitting there and taking in what is happening is kind of awe-inspiring when you watch the movie itself, because this is happening. This is happening in space. There's like all of this stuff going on in these slow shots, and you'll miss it if you're not watching it.
All right, good advice. Ross?
I'm going to spin off of what Dayton said, that the soundtrack of this movie is one of the most influential legacies of all of Star Trek. This movie gave us the TNG theme, it gave us the Klingon motif, and it also influenced all of Star Trek music going forward, but also Star Wars. Star Wars was orchestral, thanks in no small part to Star Trek.
All right. Ketwolski, did I ask you already? I did, right?
I copied him, so yes, you did.
Yeah, okay, good. Okay, so my parting thought is the long-lasting and recurring, even down to today, visual images that were established in the motion picture. Warp Core, Starfleet headquarters, the Golden Gate Bridge. There are a lot of those kinds of things that we see survive to Star Trek, even into Discovery today, that visually the motion picture introduced and has had some staying power. So to me, that's what carries forward for me from this movie, is that even 40 years later, its visuals are sufficiently, space dock.
Yep.
And even the flybys, other ones have done flybys, not as long,
small pods.
but all of that came from this movie, survives down to this day, and I think that's a remarkable achievement. All right, that I think wraps us up.
I didn't give my final thought.
Oh, I thought, well, you used up your time with your soundtrack question, so we're already out of time. I'm sorry, Sean, but
okay. Thanks.
But so thank you to our guests for joining us for today, and I hope you all come back at some point for one of our future shows. For folks watching, program note, we are reuniting tonight at 9 p.m. Pacific time for our weekly Mandalorian after show, Mandalicious. So join us again for that as well. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us, and I hope you look back on these 40 years as hopefully as I do, looking into the future.
Final thought, it's the best Star Trek movie of all. Thank you, goodbye.
Okay, there you go, Sean. There's your final thought.
Everyone.
Thanks, and Demon High School football rules.
Wild Stallions!
Hyper last thought. More Deltons.
Oh, okay.
Take that, Me Too. No.
I think we're off, unless we're still on Twitch, Ross.
I'm waiting until the craziness calms down, because this is gorgeous.